Now and then, we'd just like to remind you it is live television, but it's all in hand, and we're all now going to make our way through the headlines of today's papers in the news review. Pleased to say we're joined by the author and broadcaster Emma Wolfe. Good to see you again. Thanks for coming in. Yeah, we lost the map there for a second, but it's back. It's back. We're back. Nothing's going to go awry with the paper review, and we've got a lot of stories to get through, including some big threats from the president yesterday on Truth Social.
Absolutely. So Trump's latest threat is that he will obliterate Iran's power station and their desalination, in other words, their water plants, their freshwater plants, if Tehran does not agree to the peace terms shortly. As usual with Trump, it's on Truth Social, as you say, which isn't necessarily the most diplomatic of sort of channels to negotiate with Tehran on. Secondly, it seems to be quite mixed messaging here. It's a big threat, but in the same kind of post, he's also praising Tehran. He's saying a much more reasonable regime in power now. He seems to be saying, we will go in hard. But, everything is going fine. And predictably, Iran have been saying, well, they are actually calling these proposals excessive, unrealistic and irrational. So the response from Tehran is not positive. It hasn't exactly started well. No. And, of course, Iran is still firing a fresh wave of missiles at Israel overnight. And there is this... we're over a month now, and the risk of further escalation is growing. Oil prices are soaring around the world. We've just had a record high prices for a monthly rise. And I think that Trump's kind of, both beating them with a big stick but also using good words is just getting increasingly garbled, actually.
It's noted in The Guardian, in the second column, that destroying civilian infrastructure such as power and water facilities would be illegal under international humanitarian law and would likely constitute a war crime. And it just strikes me that we have heard the decrying of what would be described as kind of Russia's cynical, egregious attacks on Ukrainian power infrastructure and power capacity, especially during what was an incredibly cold winter. And that would have been decried across every parliament building across Europe and beyond.
Of course.
And on Truth Social yesterday, the leader of the most powerful country in the world threatened to do a very similar action. Now, will you get a very similar reaction if that was to happen?
Well, indeed, but you could also say, look at what the Iranian regime have been doing for the past few decades. I'm sure that's what Trump would say. They've been committing war crimes, genocide against their own people, effectively. Look what happened in January. And again, with Trump, it's very difficult to disentangle what's threat with what's actual credible, what's possible, and what he's actually planning to do.
I guess the counter-argument, someone will say, well, look, we appreciate the impact that the regime's had on the country, but there are still 90 million people that need to drink fresh water and need to be heated and need to have air conditioning or need to have electricity or be able to feed themselves and to cook. And, it was, again, one of those posts that came up kind of early morning in the US, and lots of people questioning the timing of these posts as well and whether there's anything to read into the fact that sometimes they appear to come before markets open. There was accusations levelled against the president by the Speaker of the Iranian parliament saying, look, watch what he's going to do. It will happen before markets open. So it seems a very, you said, kind of garbled or kind of mumbled kind of communications. It doesn't
inconsistent.
It doesn't seem coherent, does it?
It doesn't seem coherent, and to be praising the Iranian regime as more reasonable in the same post at the same time as you are also threatening them with, as you say, devastating impact. And he's demanding, the counter to you is that also he's demanding that the Strait of Hormuz reopen, which is supplying billions and billions, goods need to pass through for the entire world, and billions of barrels of oil which cannot get through. So, on both sides, we are stuck, aren't we?
Yeah, I think stuck
or in a tricky situation.
Stuck, it seems a very apt word at the moment, and I'm sure kind of, whilst there are these meetings in Keir Starmer and various other European allies looking to try and kind of take some grip of the situation, there doesn't seem to be any way of leveraging control over this.
The bigger stuff is happening elsewhere than these European meetings.
And actually, I was just seeing a little earlier reports from Reuters that there's been strikes against Iran by Israel's military. Iran's oil minister saying that They are still selling oil themselves, and then also reporting from the judiciary in Iran that they have executed 2 men convicted, they say, of links to opposition groups and armed attacks on government buildings. So, it's a very kind of fragile situation there, to say the least. I just want to move on to a story that we broke here on Sky News about just approaching 11 o'clock yesterday morning. It's in a lot of the papers. The BBC crisis regarding Scott Mills. Now, lots of allegations being made. We've not heard from Scott. We've not heard from anybody that's made the allegations directly. And it's filling up an awful lot of social media airtime. He ultimately has been let go from the corporation. Hauled off air is the phrase that's used by the Mail, although I would counter that slightly, because if you did hear his last comments on air, it was, "I'll see you tomorrow."
Yeah.
But he does no longer have any employment at the corporation. And I think the bit that just jumped out at me was the speed at which the BBC worked at. I worked at the BBC for a decade, and speed is not normally its middle name. But this is an instance where often the BBC is criticised for kind of inaction.
Yeah.
There seems to be a lot of action, and of course we don't have the full understanding of the situation surrounding these allegations. But it does seem rather notable that the BBC just moved very swiftly from Tuesday to Monday, and it was all done and dusted from their perspective.
Yeah, almost as though it's a reaction to the fact that they haven't acted swiftly enough in the past. And as you say, we don't know the details of the Scott Mills allegations, and it's very difficult to gauge whether that was a proportionate response without knowing those details, whether they found out something that necessitated immediate action or whether a gentler process should have taken place. It's also worth noting Tim Davie leaves on Thursday, 2 days' time.
Yeah.
So there is also suggestions that he wants to clear the decks, to get things done, to sort of sweep things clean before he leaves on Thursday.
And he had been on record as saying, look, no one is effectively kind of bigger than their show, and there will be a zero-tolerance approach to any wrongdoing. Now, again, like we say, we don't know what the detail is, and Scott may come out and have his rebuttal. It's said in the papers here that Mills's team are taking legal action in the wake of the sacking, so I'm sure there'll be more to come on this. But
the speculation is not helpful, is it? Because, without people knowing, there's just so much. This is the era that we live in with social media, where there's just so much speculation floating around.
And actually, I think that was one of the points that came very apparent to me looking at social media, was a lot of people going, look, we don't want to speculate. We kind of need a bit more detail so we can understand what's alleged to have gone on here. And that detail, certainly in the public sphere, short in supply at the moment, although I'm sure, this will be a story that continues to...
But in a vacuum, things come in, don't they? They come in to fill up the space, the lack of information.
Let's move on to the front page of the Telegraph, shall we? An ultimatum from Sir Keir Starmer to resident doctors, formerly known as junior doctors. He's going in pretty hard.
I know, and this is another interesting, example. Maybe it's the theme of the day of people making, using big words. He seems to have come out much more forcefully, the Prime Minister, this time. This is a planned 6-day strike, which is due to kick off by resident doctors, as you say. Another NHS strike kicking off from next Tuesday. So that's just following the Easter holiday, sort of long bank holiday weekend. And Starmer's issued a far more strongly worded ultimatum, calling this strike reckless. This obviously comes at a time just ahead of these crucial May local elections. But is also going to cause Starmer some trouble. I mean, this is a 6-day strike, as I say. The BMA are demanding 26% pay rise, or pay restoration, as they call it. And that comes a few weeks after they rejected Wes Streeting's 7.1% pay offer. So they rejected that. I think the BMA didn't put that ballot to their members. Again, though, the Prime Minister's tough stance is going to be tricky for him within his own party. All of these decisions that he's trying to make, are tricky within his own party, within a very, very divided party. The Labour left are, much more sympathetic and have supported NHS strikes. Then you have the public who don't want to be inconvenienced and are increasingly, although they're sympathetic to healthcare staff, they are increasingly kind of losing sympathy, I think, with junior doctors, resident doctors, who are on what many would see during a cost of living crisis, are on a pretty good salary already.
Well, there's 2 points to that jumped out at me in this Telegraph article. Firstly, sentence that says polling last month suggested the public largely opposed planned strikes.
Yeah.
YouGov survey finding 38% supported doctors, 52% did not.
And that's a change. That's a change.
Yeah.
It used to be that people would always support the doctors and nurses. But I think as time's gone on, I think there's been 59 days lost in the past few years, 15 strikes. I think people are starting to feel, while they're struggling, they're working hard and they're not earning anything like these levels of salary. You know, the demands for 26% pay increase, it seems a bit excessive.
I remember covering junior doctor strikes when Jeremy Hunt was Health Secretary, about 2016, 2017, somewhere around there. And I vividly remember being outside a hospital in Leeds and cars going past honking their horns, some people coming and giving, I'll give you a tenner, go and buy yourself some coffees. You know, the picket lines were busy and they were well supported. That YouGov survey suggests otherwise. And the other thing I kind of wonder, kind of intra-NHS, is this line that resident doctors have received the highest pay rise of all public sector workers for 2 years in a row. I appreciate the argument that the BMA is putting forward, there's been pay erosion, but that's also been across the public sector.
Exactly.
And I wonder what the relationship is like within the NHS. There will be janitors, there will be porters, there will be nurses, midwives, there will be other medical professionals, radiologists, for example, who will not have had the same union support.
Don't
who have
have
not
such
had
a powerful
the
union.
same lobbying to get what's been got for resident doctors. And I wonder what colleagues make of all of this.
I think there is that tension, absolutely. I think there is that tension between different sectors of the NHS.
We could talk about the NHS for a long time. It's actually the 6th biggest employer on the planet. It is huge. And I think that's always, sometimes we kind of forget that. It is a juggernaut, and it does an awful lot of good. But when you get to that kind of size, you also pick up an awful lot of troubles along the way as well, I suppose. It's just a story that's on page 13 of the Eye. Navy holding off on seizing Russian vessels. This was kind of touted with a bit of fanfare that the UK was finally in a position to kind of track down and also kind of seize the shadow fleet that is being used to fund Putin's war. The shadow fleet of tankers that are either running around without their trackers on, or using false flags, or not insured, or a combination of all three, sometimes together, carrying oil to countries that are buying cheap Russian oil, and then the money goes to fund the war coffers. It's being said, according to the paper, there are 8 sanctioned Russian tankers in the Channel. The Navy's not seizing them because, according to a senior NATO official talking to the Eye, allegedly the UK is not ready to launch the seizures, pointing to Whitehall's nervousness about the legality of the operations, the risk of doing so if it going wrong, and the need for it being signed off at the highest level.
Yeah, this is really interesting, because only in January, as you say, Starmer was really talking tough. We had a bit more strong rhetoric from Starmer. He said that Putin should be in no doubt with going after his shadow fleet. And that rhetoric hasn't resulted in action. There does seem to be a kind of a sort of nervousness about our military capability, about our... But I mean, and we've seen this with Iran, haven't we? We've seen the sort of, where are these HMS? What are they doing? Why are they stuck in Portsmouth? Is one going to take 8 days to get there? Do we actually have the capability? We've got frigates not being made or not quite ready, and some of them in dry dock, and some of them still being in maintenance, and some of them don't work in warmer waters. And it just makes you think. And also, look, operations at sea, anything amphibious is notoriously complicated and not very successful usually. So it's weird to think of these 8 vessels circling in the Channel, and we're not doing anything about it.
I should imagine nobody more frustrated than the sailors of the Royal Navy, most likely. You're like, look, we've done the training, but we need the facilities to be able to do this. It's interesting that also saying that sanctioned ships were loitering around key British undersea infrastructure in recent days as well, on Sunday, in fact. And again, we kind of saw the tracking of one of those spy boats, you know, earlier in the year, and the fact that in prior times the UK surfaced submarines to kind of go, look, we're watching you, watching us. A tricky one. We've got a little bit of time, just about a minute or so left. What else have we got?
Labour urging to help Britain's drivers. I mean, this is really interesting because obviously, as we mentioned, oil prices are soaring. And drivers are really starting to see it now on the petrol forecourts. I'm not a driver, I'm a cyclist. And I sometimes look and cycling past petrol stations around London, and you do see, I'm now aware that it's 158 in some parts of London. So people are definitely feeling this. They're feeling not necessarily shortage yet, although there's been threats of that as well, but the price is going up and up. And actually, when you look into the price increase, a lot of that is fuel duty, a lot of it is, I think, over 50% is VAT VAT and fuel duty. So the government, understandably, are being asked, and Rachel Reeves is doing well, the coffers. The Treasury coffers are doing very well out of this. I think that was on the front of the Times or something.
And they're suggesting £20 million a day extra in taxation.
So they could help out drivers.
Time will tell whether they do or not.
Yeah.
Emma, good to have you with us. Good to have you with us here on Sky News. Stick with us with Anna and Wilf after the break.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?